It was a quiet morning, the kind of morning where everything seems perfect, peaceful, almost too good to be true. I walked out to the edge of my property, holding a simple metal sign in my hands. The words were plain but firm. Private property, nitrogen monoxide, trespassing, nothing fancy, nothing aggressive, just a warning. Something I thought every property owner had the right to display. I hammered it into the ground, the sound echoing slightly in the crisp morning air. I stood back to admire it, imagining that this small sign would finally stop strangers from using my land as a shortcut. I had tolerated them for weeks, neighbors, kids running across delivery trucks, cutting through, random joggers leaving muddy footprints on my carefully tended lawn. Enough was enough. But what I didn't realize, at that moment, was that this simple act, hammering a sign into my own land, would trigger a chain of events I could never have imagined by late afternoon. I received the first sign that my peaceful life was about to be disrupted. An email from the HOA. The subject line read ominously, "Unauthorized signage, immediate action required." I clicked it, expecting maybe a minor complaint, perhaps a note about aesthetics or design codes. But as I read the email, my stomach sank. "You have placed unauthorized signage on HOA property. Remove it immediately to avoid fines and further action. HOA property." I reread the email multiple times. The attached photograph clearly showed my sign on my land. Right next to the survey stakes marking my property line, it was baffling. How could someone claim I was violating HOA rules on my own property? The email continued, "Failure to comply may result in fines or legal proceedings." Fines, legal proceedings. Over a simple metal sign. I stared at the screen, incredulous. I knew then this wasn't just about the sign anymore. It was about control, about ego, about someone trying to exert authority over land that wasn't theirs to control. The first domino had fallen. The next morning, as I was finishing my coffee, I noticed a figure approaching through the mist near my driveway. Clipboard in hand, head held high, determined, unrelenting. It was Karen, the self-appointed enforcer of HOA rules. She had been eyeing me since the day I moved in, but now she had concrete ammunition. "You need to remove that sign immediately," she said, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "It violates community aesthetics and property standards." I swallowed my disbelief. "It's on my property," I said firmly. She shook her head. "According to HOA records, this area is under our jurisdiction." I froze. "Your records?" "Yes, you're trespassing." I wanted to laugh, but something in her expression told me she was deadly serious. She turned and walked back toward the neighborhood, leaving me with the first chilling realization. This wasn't going to be a simple dispute. It was a war, and the first battle had just begun. The next morning, I awoke to an uneasy quiet. The birds chirped, the sun rose, but something felt off, the kind of tension that makes you glance over your shoulder. Expecting trouble, I was right. At exactly 7:32 a.m., the distant wail of sirens cut through the air. I rushed to the window and saw flashing blue and red lights on my driveway. My heart skipped a beat. 2 police cars had arrived. Moments later, 2 officers approached, notebooks in hand. One of them, a tall man with a calm demeanor, spoke first. "Sir, we received a report of trespassing on HOA property. We need to speak with you." I froze. Trespassing? On my land. The officers exchanged a glance, but remained professional. We're just here to investigate the complaint, the second officer said. I grabbed my copy of the property deed and the survey map, holding them out. Here, everything you need to know is right here. This is my land, marked by these stakes. The taller officer walked with me to the boundary markers, inspecting them carefully. He measured, compared with the survey, and even called out coordinates. The shorter officer jotted notes, glancing between my papers and the stakes. Finally, the first officer nodded. Looks like your claim checks out, sir. This is indeed your property. Relief washed over me, but only briefly, because in that very moment, I saw her, Karen, emerging from behind a tree, clipboard in hand, hair slightly disheveled, eyes blazing. Her dramatic entrance was almost comical. If it weren't so terrifying, this is not his land. She shouted. According to HOA records, this is community property. You are trespassing. The officer glanced at her, confused. Ma'am, do you have official documentation? Karen held up a printout, a screenshot of a Google map with the disputed area highlighted in yellow. Her confidence radiated. Yes, our internal records confirm this. The taller officer sighed audibly. Ma'am, that is not a legal document. We cannot take that as proof of ownership. Her face turned red, veins standing out on her forehead. It's what we use internally. She yelled. I stepped forward calmly. Officers, please see the official county maps and my deed. The stakes are clearly on my property. This sign is on my land, not the HOAS. The taller officer nodded. Sir, you're in the clear. The complaint was unfounded. You have full rights to this land, Karen gasped. She seemed momentarily stunned, unable to process her defeat. Then, as if remembering herself, she glared at me and said, This isn't over. And with that, she stormed off, muttering threats that barely made sense. The officers packed up and left, but the tension lingered. I knew Karen wasn't done. The HOA was not done. This was only the beginning. Later that day, an envelope was taped to my front door. The HOAS logo stared up at me. Inside, a notice demanded the removal of the sign, citing violation of community regulations and threatening daily fines. I laughed quietly to myself. Daily fines. For a sign. On my land, I realized then that this was no longer about aesthetics, no longer about rules. This was personal, and the next moves would be theirs. By the time evening rolled around, the envelope from the HOA still sat on my kitchen counter, almost glowing under the dim light. I stared at it for a long moment, imagining all the possible ways they could try to enforce these ridiculous fines. Daily fines. For a single, unassuming metal sign on my own land. I took a deep breath and picked up the phone. It was time to escalate. Not with shouting, not with threats, but with law. I called a property lawyer. Someone highly recommended, someone who had dealt with difficult HOAs before. When he answered, I explained the entire saga, the sign, the trespassing claim, the police visit Karen's dramatic highlighter map. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then he chuckled. You're serious? He asked. Yes. Unfortunately, I replied. He told me to gather all documents, deeds, official surveys, the HOA's own notices, everything. He wanted every scrap of proof. 2 days later, we met in his office. Spread out before him were papers, maps, stakes, measurements, emails and photographs. He studied each one meticulously, nodding slowly. "This," he said finally, "isn't just a simple dispute. This is harassment, plain and simple. And you have all the evidence to prove it." I felt a small surge of relief. The scales were finally tilting in my favor. He drafted a cease and desist letter, addressed to the HOA board and Karen personally. It was concise, firm, and legally ironclad. The HOA must stop contacting the police over my property. They must remove any threats of fines or penalties. They must recognize my legal property boundaries. They were warned against any future harassment or intimidation. We sent the letter via certified mail. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought logic, legality, and authority would prevail. But HOAs are unpredictable. 2 days later, I received another envelope. This one was marked Mandatory Emergency HOA Board Meeting. Attendance required. Mandatory? For what? I wasn't a member. I wasn't on the agenda. I didn't even vote. Curiosity and perhaps a need to protect my own rights got the better of me. I attended the meeting. The clubhouse was packed. About 30 neighbors sat in folding chairs, whispering and glancing toward me. It felt like stepping into a courtroom mixed with a high school showdown. The HOA president tried to maintain composure, but you could see the tension in his shoulders. "We have a serious issue," he began, "regarding unauthorized signage, legal threats, and interference with community rules." Karen immediately stood, her glare fixed on me. He put up a sign to defy the HOA. She shouted, "And if we allow this, it will lead to chaos." Chaos, from a small metal warning sign. A brave neighbor raised his hand, whispering loud enough for the room to hear, "But the sign is on his land." Karen's face twisted. "No, it isn't." Another neighbor said firmly, "I've seen the stakes myself. It's clearly his property." A third chimed in, "The HOA doesn't even have authority over that strip of land." The room murmured, growing restless. The tide was turning. Karen's confident act of aggression was unraveling, and yet she was undeterred. "He is undermining everything we've built," she screamed. The HOA president slammed his folder shut, trying to regain control. "This meeting is over," he said. Karen refused to sit. She shouted, "You can't stop me. He will ruin the HOA." For the first time, I realized that this fight was personal, and Karen's obsession was only going to escalate. The next morning, I woke up to a quiet that felt deceptively calm. I knew better by now. Quiet meant plotting. After the HOA meeting, I realized Karen and her allies weren't going to stop. They weren't going to respect surveys, laws, or common sense. If they thought a cease and desist letter would scare me, they were sorely mistaken. I decided it was time to step up my game. Not with threats, but with evidence. Solid, irrefutable evidence. I walked my property with a small tripod, my camera, and a notebook. I filmed the boundary stakes, the placement of my sign, and every inch of the disputed land. Every photo, every angle was meticulously documented. Then I cross-referenced it with the official county survey maps and my property deed. Every measurement matched perfectly. Every stake, every corner, every inch of my land was clearly mine. I compiled it all into a detailed report. Pictures, maps, timestamps, even video footage showing my sign standing proudly on my property. I named it Property Rights Documentation, Evidence for HOA compliance. This wasn't just for me, it was insurance. It was protection against false claims, escalating threats, and attempts to manipulate the police or neighbors. By the afternoon, I received another notice from the HOA. This time, it wasn't a polite envelope. It was a full-blown formal letter. Immediate removal of unauthorized signage is required. Failure to comply will result in daily fines and legal action. I read it and laughed quietly. Daily fines. For a sign. On my land, I scanned the letter, highlighted every false statement, and attached it to an email for my lawyer. Within hours, I had a reply. This is harassment. Do not respond to them directly. Save everything. We will use this. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't waiting. That afternoon, I saw her pacing near the edge of my property, clipboard in hand, measuring, squinting, muttering to herself. She was desperate. Her confidence was cracking. She didn't have any real legal ground, and she knew it, but she refused to quit. Instead, she tried intimidation. That's when I realized something crucial. The HOA was only dangerous because they believed no one would push back, so I pushed hard. I sent the compiled evidence to the HOA president with a short note. Please review the attached documentation before making any further claims about my property. Any future complaints must be based on factual, legal evidence. The silence that followed was deafening. The first real turning point was coming, because that evening, I received an unexpected email from one of my neighbors, someone I barely knew. Karen is panicking, it read. She's telling the board that you're preparing to take legal action and that they need to tread carefully. Everyone's scared. It was small, but it felt like a victory. For the first time, the HOA hierarchy was shaken. And I knew that if I stayed patient, methodical, and prepared, I could finally start turning the tide in my favor. For the first time since the sign went up, I felt hope. The following week, the tension in the neighborhood became palpable. It was the kind of tension that makes small things feel huge. A neighbor's whispered conversation, a lingering glance from someone walking past, a truck parked slightly off the curb. I knew Karen was trying to rally support for her side, but she was losing the battle quietly, one person at a time, that morning. As I checked my email, I saw messages from neighbors I had never even spoken to. One by one, they expressed their frustration with Karen and the board's heavy-handed tactics. A man named Jeff wrote, "She's bullied my family for years. It's about time someone stands up to her." Another neighbor, a woman named Maria, said, "Thank you for documenting everything. I've been scared to say anything, but you've shown how it can be done." Even my quiet, stoic neighbor Paul reached out personally. He handed me a flash drive at his front porch. All the videos I have of Karen and her board members breaking rules. They're on here. Keep it safe. You're doing the right thing. It was overwhelming, and yet empowering. Meanwhile, Karen's desperation began to show. She started showing up in places she had no right to, like the edges of my property in the early morning, scribbling in her clipboard, muttering threats to anyone who would listen. I even caught her attempting to measure the exact distance from my sin to the road. As if that would somehow prove ownership, her behavior was erratic. She began confronting neighbors openly, claiming that anyone supporting me was disrupting community harmony. But the reaction she received was the opposite. People were tired. Tired of her theatrics, tired of her intimidation, and tired of false claims. The HOA board, sensing the growing unrest, convened another emergency meeting. This time, it wasn't just the usual members. Almost half the neighborhood showed up, quietly watching, whispering, and exchanging knowing glances. Karen arrived, her hair slightly disheveled, her face a mask of determination and fear. She stepped up to the podium, scanning the room like a general surveying a battlefield. "We cannot allow him to continue this blatant disregard for HOA rules," she shouted. A neighbor stood up and calmly said, "With all due respect, Karen, the land is his property. All evidence shows it." Murmurs rippled through the room. Karen's eyes widened. She tried to regain control, raising her voice, pointing at the documents she had hastily collected. But no one cared. The tide had turned. Another board member, someone who had once blindly supported Karen, stood up and declared, "I think it's time we acknowledge the facts. The property belongs to him, not the HOA." Gasps filled the room. Karen's face turned red, veins standing out on her neck. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The board president sighed and muttered, "Sit down, Karen, enough." It was the moment of her meltdown. For the first time, the facade cracked. The queen of the HOA had been dethroned, at least morally, in front of the very neighbors. She had tried to manipulate. I stood quietly in the back, documenting everything mentally, knowing this was a turning point. Karen's power was waning, and I could feel the balance shifting in my favor. The war wasn't over yet. She was still dangerous, still determined, and still unpredictable. But now, for the first time, I knew she could be stopped, and the neighborhood, quietly, was beginning to rally behind me. Karen was furious. I could see it in the way she stormed into the neighborhood clubhouse the next morning, slamming the door behind her so hard the echo rattled the walls. Her clipboard flew open, papers spilling to the floor like evidence of a crumbling empire. She gathered the remaining board, members, and whispered fiercely. From what I later learned, she was plotting a new strategy, legal escalation. It wasn't enough to intimidate me with fines or threats anymore. She wanted the law on her side, even if it meant bending or outright fabricating the truth. A few days later, I received an email from the HOA's attorney. My stomach sank as I read it. "The property boundary in question has been historically used by the HOA. You are in violation of community standards. Failure to comply will result in legal action and financial penalties." I stared at it in disbelief. Historically used. The land had never belonged to them. The stakes, the surveys, even county records proved that clearly. I forwarded the email to my lawyer immediately. He replied within an hour, "This is an attempt at intimidation. They're fabricating historical use claims. Do not respond directly. Document everything, including their attempts to communicate." That night, I set up my camera near the property line. I filmed Karen pacing, talking to neighbors, gesturing wildly as she tried to sway opinions. She had no legal ground, so she attempted psychological warfare. 2 days later, I got a second letter, even more aggressive. "Your sin constitutes a trespass on HOA land. Immediate removal is demanded. Failure will result in daily fines and possible court action." At this point, I knew words alone wouldn't suffice. I needed a decisive legal counterattack, something that would end the intimidation once and for all. I called my lawyer and explained the latest developments. He smiled, a confident, reassuring smile. "Good, we've been waiting for this. The more aggressive they get, the easier it is to show harassment and abuse of authority. He drafted a formal response to the HOA, attaching all my evidence, official county survey maps, property deeds, time-stamped photographs of the sign, and stakes video footage of Karen trespassing on my land and instructing neighbors to file false complaints. The letter was strong, direct, and unambiguous. The property in question is legally owned by my name. Any further attempts to intimidate, harass, or claim authority over this land will be considered harassment and reported to appropriate authorities. You are hereby formally instructed to cease all such actions immediately. I sent it via certified mail. The next day, I received confirmation that HOA had no choice but to acknowledge receipt. For the first time, I felt a sense of control. The pendulum was swinging. The bully was starting to realize that I wasn't afraid, and legal authority was now firmly on my side. But Karen was far from finished. Desperate, unpredictable, and cornered, she began planning her next move. And I had a feeling it was going to get messy, very messy. By midweek, the atmosphere in the neighborhood had changed. People were whispering, watching, and waiting to see what Karen would do next. She had lost credibility, yet she remained determined to claw back power. Like a trapped animal, I spent the morning preparing. My lawyer had advised me to document everything meticulously. I walked every inch of my property again, ensuring the stakes were visible, the boundaries marked, and the sign clearly standing on my land. I checked my cameras, verified timestamps, and even mapped out lines using GPS coordinates for extra proof. Late that afternoon, I noticed a suspicious vehicle parked near the property line. Karen emerged from it, clipboard in hand, muttering angrily. She seemed more frantic than ever, pacing back and forth, talking loudly to herself. I filmed her from a distance. Every erratic movement, every gesture, every whispered comment she made while measuring the land would become evidence later. That evening, my lawyer called. "The county surveyors will be coming in 2 days," he said. "This is perfect. Let them do the official verification. Any false claims or interference by the HOA will be documented." I felt a mix of relief and anticipation. The county survey would be the final word, the undeniable proof that the land was mine. But I also knew Karen wouldn't go quietly. Sure enough, the next morning she showed up at my driveway before sunrise, trying to measure the property herself, making a scene. Neighbors whispered as she marched up and down the edge of my land. It was clear she was desperate, and desperation makes people reckless. By noon, the county survey team arrived. I greeted them politely, providing access to all areas of the property and explaining my concerns about HOA interference. They nodded, setting up equipment and taking precise measurements. Karen appeared again, this time demanding to speak to the surveyors. She argued, raised her voice, and waved her clipboard as if that would somehow influence the official verification. The surveyors remained calm, professional, and polite, making notes and taking measurements methodically. I documented everything: her threats, her arguments, her frantic behavior. It was becoming a pattern. The more she lost, the more aggressive she became. As the surveyors finished for the day, they promised to provide an official report confirming the property boundaries. My lawyer assured me that once the report was issued, the HOA's false claims would have no legal standing whatsoever. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a sense of real momentum. The scales were finally tipping in my favor. Karen could scream, intimidate, or threaten all she wanted, but the law, the facts, and the county surveyors were now on my side, and that's when I realized this battle was no longer just about a sign. It was about principles, about standing up against intimidation, and about reclaiming my peace of mind. The final showdown was approaching, and I was ready. The day started quietly, with the kind of calm that only comes before a storm. I had just returned from checking my property cameras when I noticed movement near the edge of my land. Karen was at it again. She was going door to door, clipboard in hand, whispering to neighbors and gesturing dramatically. It was clear she was trying to sway public opinion against me. Her tone was insistent, almost desperate. "Do you realize what he's doing to the neighborhood?" She would say. This could set a dangerous precedent. Neighbors listened politely, but there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere. People were tired of her theatrics. They were beginning to see the truth. The land was mine, and her claims were false. By mid-morning, a small crowd of curious neighbors gathered near my driveway, drawn by the tension and the drama. Karen, seeing this, stepped into the middle, waving her arms, trying to rally support. "He is defying the HOA." She shouted, "This sign must be removed. He cannot do this." A neighbor, bold and unafraid, stepped forward. "Karen, the sign is on his land. We've seen the stakes. The surveys confirm it." Karen froze for a moment, her confident facade cracking. She tried to respond, but her words faltered. This doesn't matter. You don't understand." Meanwhile, my cameras captured everything. Her frustration, her shouting, her frantic gestures, all meticulously documented for my legal records. Later that afternoon, the county surveyors returned with preliminary results. I was allowed to review a snapshot of the boundary lines. The report clearly indicated that the disputed area, every inch of it, belonged to me. I felt a surge of relief and vindication. For the first time, there was undeniable proof, independent of my deeds, my documents, or my surveys. The official county survey confirmed my ownership. Karen, of course, did not receive this news well. By evening, I saw her pacing in front of the community clubhouse, muttering threats and making calls. Her desperation was palpable. She was realizing that all her attempts, threats, intimidation, harassment, were collapsing around her. Neighbors started quietly approaching me, expressing support and relief. Some shared stories of how Karen had bullied them in the past. Others apologized for not speaking up sooner. It was a small but significant victory. The neighborhood was beginning to rally behind me. As I walked back to my property that evening, I looked at the sign I had put up weeks ago. The words seemed stronger than ever. Private property, no trespassing. It wasn't just a warning to strangers anymore. It was a symbol of my resolve, my rights, and the beginning of justice. The next steps were clear. The HOA would try other desperate moves. But with the survey results on my side, I finally had the upper hand. The battle was far from over, but now I could fight it on my terms. The following week, Karen's desperation escalated to almost unrecognizable levels. She had lost the support of the neighborhood. Her board members were quietly distancing themselves, and the county survey had confirmed my land ownership. But she refused to accept defeat. It started with whispers, subtle threats, and repeated visits to my property line. But soon the harassment intensified. I noticed notes taped to my gate, accusing me of violating HOA rules and warning me of legal consequences. Then came the complaints. Fictitious claims were filed, alleging trespassing on HOA land. Delivery drivers were told to report me if I stepped outside. Even local authorities received repeated calls questioning my actions. But this time, I was ready. I documented everything meticulously: screenshots of emails, videos of Karen pacing and measuring my land, and timestamps of each false complaint filed. Every action she took was another piece of evidence for my legal team. My lawyer, reviewing the new developments, told me, "Karen is trying to provoke you into reacting emotionally. She wants you to slip up. Do not engage directly. Every interaction, every move, must be documented and strategic." I spent the next few days preparing a detailed log of her harassment, combining all evidence I had collected over the past weeks: official property deeds and surveys, photos and videos of the sign and property boundaries, audio and video footage of Karen instructing neighbors to make false reports, copies of all emails, letters, and HOA notices. I even included testimonies from neighbors who had witnessed Karen's harassment firsthand. With this, my legal team drafted a comprehensive complaint, a clear, airtight case proving harassment, abuse of HOA authority, and intentional false reporting. The plan was to submit this to the county and, if necessary, take the matter to civil court. Meanwhile, Karen's actions grew increasingly erratic. She began knocking on doors aggressively, filming neighbors, and attempting to manipulate public opinion with misinformation. Each attempt backfired. Neighbors started avoiding her, sharing their observations with me, and offering further support. The neighborhood was quietly uniting behind me, and Karen's power base was crumbling rapidly. Her desperate attempts to intimidate only provided more evidence for my legal case. By the end of the week, I felt a sense of clarity and control. I had an experience since the first morning I placed that sign. The next move was mine. The final showdown with Karen and the HOA was approaching. And this time, I would not just defend my land, I would secure justice once and for all. The day started with a quiet sense of anticipation. My lawyer had finalized the complaint, a meticulously documented report detailing weeks of harassment, false reports, and HOA abuse of power. Every email, every video, every threat was catalogued, timestamped, and ready for submission. At 9 a.m., the documents were filed with the county clerk's office. Copies went to the HOA, and of course, Karen personally. It was the first time the legal system had officially entered the battle. Within hours, the HOA board was in full panic mode. Emails flew back and forth between board members, their tone frantic and uncoordinated. Karen tried to assert control, calling meetings, issuing urgent notices, and demanding explanations. But the board had grown wary of her antics. Many members whispered privately that this had gone too far, that Karen had pushed her power beyond reason. Meanwhile, the neighborhood began reacting. Neighbors who had once been intimidated by Karen approached me cautiously, offering support and sharing stories of similar harassment. It was clear public sentiment was shifting, and Karen was losing ground. By late afternoon, Karen appeared on my property again, pacing and muttering, her face red with fury. She held a printed copy of my complaint, shaking it like a weapon. This isn't over," she shouted. "You can't just do this to me." I watched calmly from my porch, filming the encounter for further documentation. The cameras captured her every frantic gesture, her shouting, and her attempts to intimidate anyone who walked by. It was clear Karen had finally realized that her endgame was near. The legal filing had exposed her harassment and false reporting, and her credibility had been shattered. The HOA tried one last-ditch effort to mediate, sending letters demanding removal of the sign and discussion of the property boundary. My lawyer responded swiftly, reminding them of the official survey, the property deed, and the ongoing legal case for harassment. By evening, Karen's frantic calls and emails had slowed. She was retreating, realizing that the fight she had started was about to end, and that her attempts to bully, intimidate, and manipulate had only strengthened my case. As I stood looking at the sign that morning, now bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about property. It was about standing firm, documenting every injustice, and allowing the truth to prevail. And the best part, the truth, backed by evidence and the law, was now firmly on my side. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control and a sense of inevitability. Justice was coming.